let's talk about Andor, all right? This is Star Wars with no space lasers. And Andor is the Star Wars show that looked at Star Wars and said, what if the real villain was paperwork? Because the Gorman massacre wasn't a sci-fi moment. It's a political manual with better lighting. And I know some of you are already thinking like, Troy, don't make Star Wars political. Like, dude, the bad guy is a senator who turns into a dictator and rules through fear. This franchise is aggressively political. Okay? It's just usually dressed like a Hot Topic clearance rack or Spirit Halloween 3 days before Thanksgiving. So let's talk about what actually happens on Gorman. No lightsabers. There's no epic duel. There's no chosen one. It's just people standing in a square and then getting their shit absolutely rocked by giant robots when the Empire shows up. Nobody's screaming. Nobody's raging. People are organized. And then so is the Empire. But the Empire's quiet and the Empire's masked. And the stormtroopers line up like an Amazon delivery photo. And it's like, and the point is fascism doesn't enter being like, hey, I'm evil, yo. It enters being like, hey, yo, whoa. Fascists always say, yo. They say, hey, I'm here to help with compliance. And that's the whole vibe, right? Like, which brings us to when Grand Moff Tarkin, who is especially like Space Stephen Miller, and he goes, fear will keep the local systems in line. Like that's not a villain speech. It's management strategy for fascism. That's the PowerPoint slide. And it's exactly how Trump used his ICE, his secret police, not as an immigration policy, but as a psychological warfare with a badge. You don't need to deport everyone. You just need to deport enough people publicly so everyone else starts living like they're knock on the doors next. And that's the Gorman massacre. It's not about Gorman. It's a group text to the galaxy that says, hey, you see this? This could be you. And notice how the stormtroopers look, right? No faces, no names, no expressions, just white, plastic anxiety, pretty much. Like they're not individuals. They're a policy with legs, which is why ICE agents wearing masks during live raids hit the same nerve, pretty much, right? And don't tell me it's just for safety. If it was for safety, they'd wear name tags, mask card protection, mask card permission. And it's permission to say, hey, this wasn't me. This was the system. That's what fascism does. It launders through uniforms, launders cruelty through uniforms, turns violence into customer service, pretty much. Hey, I'll be running your life today. Would you like a receipt? Hey, sir, I'll be ruining your life today. Would you like a receipt? And just like with the Empire, the Trump administration framed this as cruelty, right? And like the Empire, the Trump administration didn't frame this as cruelty. It framed it as law and order, border security, deference, which is a polite way of saying, we're going to hurt people on purpose so other people are going to behave. That's just science, bro. That's not law enforcement. That's terror with a LinkedIn profile. Like they're suiting this up. And Andor is brutally honest about this. The massacre is planned in conference rooms. Nobody says, are they civilians? They say, what's the political cost? What's the messaging? What's the precedent? Like, that's not war. That is corporate murder. That's HR asking, can we kill them in a way that tests positive with focus groups? I wonder. And that's what family separation was. That's what ICE showing up in these facilities are. It's the emperor shoving his secret police into a population to keep the locals in line so you're too afraid to stand out of line. That's not chaos. That's just strategy. A memo said, if we traumatize the population bad enough, people will stop caring. The emperor figure, Palpatine, like Trump, doesn't do any of the dirty work themselves. They delegate. They let people like Tarkin, like Stephen Miller, like various sentient neckties handle the cruelty. So he can stand back and he can go, hey, many people are saying the violence is very unfortunate. Sir, you ordered the violence. You did it in business casual. Dog, you ordered the violence. You just ordered it like through a business casual email. And that's what makes Andor so terrifying, because it shows you how boring evil originates. There's no lighting. There's no chanting. It's just systems. There's no forms. It's troop deployments. Fascism isn't dramatic when it wins, and it's administrative. It's real. It's clean. And then suddenly the public square becomes a crime scene. And that's the real warning of the episode. Gorman didn't do anything special. They weren't rebels yet. They were inconvenient. That's it. That's what they were in trouble for. Fascism doesn't start by targeting the bad people. It starts by targeting the easy people. People the public is already trained to defend. Immigrants, outsiders, planets you don't visit, neighborhoods you don't live in. And the show is screaming, this is how it starts. Masked enforcers, dehumanizing language, violence, frame disorder, fear, soul to stability. By the time people say, wow, you know what? This feels pretty authoritarian. The boots are already in the square. So yeah, the Gorman Massacre in Star Wars is saying, hey, this isn't fantasy. This is just a rerun. How the f are you failing an open book test of history? Different uniforms, same playbook. If the Empire shows up at your door, it won't be with a lightsaber. It'll be with a badge and a clipboard and a very calm voice saying, don't worry, this is for your own good. I love Andor, and not because it's fun. It's not fun. Like it's there's no cute aliens selling toys. There, no one says I've got a bad feeling about this, and then everything turns out fine. Like Andor will fuck you up. Andor is Star Wars for people who already have a bad feeling and know exactly why. But I want to talk about Gorman because Gorman's not a battlefield. It's not a rebel base. It's not a secret lair with a fog machine. It's a square. It's a public square. People just standing there, talking, selling things, French outfits. It's already suspicious. No one trusts anything in a confident in a confident quilter. But the Empire looks at these guys and he says, "Nope, fuck you. I don't like that." And they land a Star Destroyer on 500 people as a warning, because standing is dangerous, obviously, as we know. Standing says, "Hey, we're still here." Standing says, "You don't own this space." Standing says, "We're not scared of you." Yet, and authoritarianism is deeply offended by insufficient fear. So the Empire shows up. Not screaming, not panicking, calm, organized. Like they got there early to make sure their parking was validated for when they landed a Star Destroyer on top of 500 people. But that's before the Gorman Massacre. During the Gorman Massacre, stormtroopers line up, helmets on, faces gone. And that's when you know you're in trouble. Because when power covers its face, it does it because it's not because it's scared, it does it because it's comfortable. Stormtroopers wear helmets for the same reason ICE agents wear masks. Not for protection, it's for permission. A mask tells them, this isn't me, this is policy, right? This will not follow me home. Just comforting when you're the one holding the weapon. And it's horrifying when you're the one selling the quilt in the public square. The Gormans aren't armed, they're standing up for themselves, they're not attacking. They're just there. And that turns out to be the crime. Not violence, presence. It's the same logic as ICE. ICE doesn't need you to riot. They need chaos. They need you to exist in the wrong place. You're here, you're undocumented, that's sufficient. The Empire doesn't call the Gormans people. They call them a situation. They're not civilians, they're a disturbance. And that's when you know something is as bad. That's when you know something bad is coming, right? Because once you turn humans into nouns, things get ugly pretty fast. And in Andor, nobody debates morality. They debate optics. How bad is this going to look? How long are people going to care? Can we outlast the outrage cycle? No one ever says, are people going to die? That's because they already decided. That's not cartoon villainy. That's real power. But real evil doesn't twirl a mustache. Real evil schedules a meeting and says, let's circle back after the massacre. And that's the part that hurts. Everything the Empire does on Gorman is legal. Everything ICE does is legal. That's the trick. Well, it's the law. Great. So is segregation. So is internment. So is apartheid. Law is not morality. JFK said, man can't live on law alone. Law is power with spell check, pretty much. And I know this because I have personally followed laws that were really dumb, cowardly, and absolutely for my own convenience. I jaywalk, I lie on my taxes, I pretend to not see things when I'm tired. Like I don't say this from a moral high ground. I say this from a Emperor Palpatine replica throne. Palpatine never fires the blaster himself. He doesn't need to. He built a system where he gets promoted, where people don't hesitate, where the people hesitate don't move up. Where the people who hesitate don't move up. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And the people who don't ask questions get pensions, right? That's leadership now. Grand Moff Tarkin says it out loud. Fear will keep the local systems in line. That's not a threat. That's a business model. You don't punish everyone. You punish enough people publicly so that when everyone else starts behaving like the knock on the door is coming for them. Gorman wasn't punished for rebellion. The rebellion didn't really exist at that level yet. Gorman wasn't really being punished for anything other than being convenient. That's the real warning. You don't need to be guilty. You just need to be a useful example, which is where Minneapolis enters the conversation, because when mass federal agents show up in unmarked vehicles and no one's sure who's in charge, that's not law enforcement. That is a dress rehearsal. And it doesn't matter if you agree with the politics of being targeted. That's the trap. Authoritarianism doesn't ask if you're right. It just says you're next. And that's where I implicate myself, because otherwise I'm just yelling into the fold. Otherwise I'm just yelling into the void. We're all very good at telling ourselves, this isn't about me. They broke the rules. I would never do that. I'm not political. Neither were the Gormans. They were selling quilts. And the Empire still ran them over with boots and called it stability. Fear doesn't arrive screaming. That's what Andor understands. Fascism doesn't kick down the door. It knocks politely, shows credentials, and then explains that it's very legal. And by the time you realize you shouldn't have answered the door, or you should have answered differently, the person's already inside reorganizing the furniture. That's why Andor is dangerous television, because it doesn't let you escape the metaphor. It doesn't say, what if this happened? It says, you've seen this before. It's happening now. And you're thinking, okay, but this is still Star Wars. Yes, but Star Wars has always been political. It used to just hide behind laser swords and daddy issues. Now it's saying the quiet part out loud. And that's Andor. It's a show that's brave enough to say fascism doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives quietly with a badge, with a helmet, and a voice that says this is perfectly legal. And if that voice sounds familiar, then you were paying attention. Welcome to the Rebellion is the one where Mon Mothma does something so unrealistic. She tells the truth. It's not a clever truth. It's not technically accurate or evasive truth. It's just the truth. She stands up to the Imperial Senate and she calmly says that the Empire is committing atrocities, that everyone is pretending otherwise, and everyone that's pretending otherwise is complicit. And the room reacts like she just lit a joint inside the Senate floor, right? Because here's the thing. In authoritarian systems, when you're yelling, it's unexpected. Drama is expected. Violence is expected. What they can't tolerate is clarity. Mon Mothma doesn't shout. She doesn't posture. She doesn't do the speech voice. She just refuses to lie politely. And that's what makes Welcome to the Rebellion a brutal episode to watch right now, because it quietly asks the question none of us are enjoying, which is, when did the opposition become so tired? And Mon Mothma's actual superpower, she doesn't have a blaster, she doesn't have the Force, she didn't even have the votes, right? What she has is a spine, which sounds like a low bar, but apparently we've misplaced ours. She knows exactly what will happen when she speaks. She knows that she's going to be surveilled. She knows they're going to kill her. She knows she's going to have to go in hiding for the rest of her life. She knows she'll be isolated. And she knows that exile is the strongest possibility and most likely the reality, which is bureaucratic language for good luck for never being able to fucking sleep again. And she does it anyway. Not because she thinks she'll win, but because she understands something crucial, which is authoritarianism doesn't need your support. It needs your silence. And she refuses to provide it. That's the rebellion. It's not vibes. It's not merch. It's not a hashtag with a clever font. It's risk. Let's talk about the current opposition. I promise I'm mad at myself too. But watching Mon Mothma and that Welcome to the Rebellion episode over and over again, watching that today feels like watching the ghost of what opposition used to look like in the United States. She doesn't hedge. She doesn't say, we're very concerned. She doesn't say, now's not the right time. She doesn't wait for donors, consultants. She doesn't go on Twitter and say some swears and thinks that's courage. She speaks like someone who understands that that waiting for the right moment is how you lose every moment. Compare that to the current Democratic opposition, which often feels like less of a resistance and more like a Wookiee giving Palpatine a slight handjob. Like every single time they stand up to him, it's like a very polite auto-reply email. Thank you so much for your concern. We take this seriously. We're monitoring the situation. Fuck you, Jim Jeffries, and the horse you rode in on, which is Chuck Schumer, and fuck you too. What are you monitoring? The situation is eating the furniture. Mon Mothma had constraints. They were called death. And she still spoke. Our opposition seems terrified of being called divisive or losing a midterm, which is fascinating because it famously not a unifying force. There's a performance of opposition. One of Andor's smartest insights is that authoritarian systems don't just rely on villains. They rely on people who tell themselves they're being on people who are telling themselves they're being pragmatic. Mon Mothma's colleagues aren't evil. Many of them are reasonable. They're civil. They're committed to the process. They don't deny the atrocities. They just insist now isn't the right time to bring it up, which should sound extremely familiar. The modern opposition is an excellent performance of resistance. They tweet, they condemn, and they fundraise. But they rarely endanger themselves, and that's the tell, because the real opposition costs something. If your resistance risks your career, your access to dinner reservations, or whatever, then it's not resistance. It's just branding. And here's why Mon Mothma's harder than any modern speech. And it's honestly because Mon Mothma doesn't mock the Empire. She doesn't dunk on Palpatine. She doesn't try to go viral. She just names the reality. And that's why the speech feels radical. Because it's not because it's fiery, but because it's honest. We somehow built this political culture that treats honesty like a liability, and outrage is outsourced to staffers. Like, we've normalized a version of opposition that's allergic to escalation. But fascism exists whether or not you do or not. Mon Mothma understands that silence doesn't buy anyone time, just gives the time room to reorganize. The rebellion isn't a brand. One of the meanest jokes Andor tells is the title, Welcome to the Rebellion. Not welcome to the movement, not welcome to the coalition, not welcome to the fundraisers. The rebellion is lonely. It costs you friends who you think you're being dramatic. It costs you colleagues who think you're being unhelpful. It costs you the comfort of pretending everything is going to sort itself out. And that's why Mon Mothma feels so threatening in this speech to the Empire. She doesn't want to be popular. She speaks knowing she'll be framed as an emotional, reckless, destabilizing woman, or radical, which historically is what happens when women refuse to shut up, or any minority, or anyone who's speaking for the equality of everyone. The last thing I want to bring up is propaganda, because that's where Trump and the Empire stop being metaphorical and they start sharing clothes, right? Because the Empire doesn't rule by convincing people it's good. It rules by convincing people that everything else is worse. That's the trick. Palpatine doesn't go on TV and says, we're evil. He goes out and he says, it is dangerous out there. There are rebels, there's chaos, there's disorder, and then suddenly the Death Star isn't tyranny. Oh, boom, it's a security system. Got it. Kind of like how the Trump administration didn't sell itself as cruel. It sold itself as necessary, right? They're criminals, they're invaders. There's threats everywhere. So when ICE shows up masked in unmarked vehicles, they're not being authoritative. They're being protective. When the protesters got beaten, it's not suppression. It's law and order. Fear is always masked as a public service. And the genius of propaganda is that it doesn't ask you to love power. It asks you to be afraid without it. That's why the Empire doesn't need everyone to agree. That's what imperialism does. It needs everyone to be nervous. That's how it thrives. Nervous people don't organize. Nervous people don't ask questions. Nervous people don't notice when the line starts to move. They just stay in it. You don't need facts if you have vibes. You don't need truth if you have a reputation. You don't need truth if you have repetition. Just keep telling people it's dangerous. It's worse than you think. You're safer if you stay quiet. That's not governance. That's programming. And the Empire understands something the modern Republicans understand perfectly. You don't scare people with reality. You scare them with stories. You scare them with caravans by shooting their own citizens, and stories about crime waves and stories about cities burning nonstop. The Empire calls rebels terrorists. Trump calls protesters thugs. Same move, different font. And the part that hurts, I could be guilty of it too. Propaganda doesn't work on people who are stupid. I mean, it does, but it mostly works on people who are tired. Tired people don't fact check. They don't contextualize. They don't slow down. They scroll. Fear scrolls are great. It's addictive. Fear is addictive. Fear gives you a villain. Fear lets you feel informed without being involved. Which is why the Empire broadcasts constant danger. Not because danger's everywhere, but because calm people start asking questions. That's unacceptable. So they flood the zone. They flood every channel, every feed, every speech. There's chaos outside, order inside. Stay close to power, stay suspicious of everyone else. And once that logic starts to set in, people start policing themselves. They stop standing in squares. They stop speaking plainly. They stop trusting their neighbors, which is the real win. The Empire doesn't need to watch everyone. It teaches everyone to watch themselves. That's propaganda when it's most effective. And that's why Mon Mothma's speech is so dangerous, because she interrupts the story. She doesn't scream. She doesn't exaggerate. She just says, this is happening. And that's the one thing propaganda cannot survive. Reality, because fear needs constant reinforcement. Truth only needs to be said once. The reason Andor resonates isn't because it's nostalgic, it's recognition. We're watching democratic institutions strain under the pressure while oppression argues about tone. We're watching cruelty become policy while leaders issue statements. We're watching people beg for clarity and due process. Mon Mothma reminded us the point of repression is not to decline gracefully, it's to draw a fucking line and to say, this is wrong, this is happening. History's happening, and history's going to remember who spoke and who hid. Mon Mothma doesn't save the galaxy with her speech. She makes things worse for herself. And that's the part we always edit out. Courage doesn't fix everything. It just tells everyone early enough that someone else might have to act, or someone else might act, which is why Welcome to the Rebellion isn't inspiring in a cozy way. It's inspiring in a way that asks something for you. Or of you. And the people claiming to oppose tyranny while refusing to inconvenience themselves. Because the rebellion doesn't need better messaging, it needs spines. Mon Mothma has one. The question is whether or not anyone else remembers where theirs is. But that's just my opinion from a certain point of view.